Hi, everyone. This is yet another episode of Disruption Talks, but I want to lead with a question that will introduce today's topic. So, what is the common denominator between Suits, between Madmen, and between Billions, the TV show? Of course, it's money. And with money at a corporate level like that, it's fat, juicy expense accounts. So when you come to think of it, it's not just a matter of making sure that they get in the limousine, that they get into the fine dining restaurant, that they fly the corporate jet. It's also a very significant status symbol. For years and years, it's been used by employers and employees alike to highlight that they're important to the company trusts them with the money. However, I think that as we are progressing into much better employer and employee relationship maturity, it's time to shake that up a bit because whilst it's very nice to send a ego complimenting signal to such an employee and allow that employee to use that signal elsewhere in the company, it's just not that practical when all the other people who don't have expense accounts have to spend their own money and then ask to get that money back, which not only isn't sort of like lending money to your company, but it's also a hassle for you and for the internal company's department. So joining us today is Sara Brooks of Pleo. She is the VP of Sales. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Philip. How are you?
I'm great. Great to have you. So, if we could just let our audience know what is it that Pleo does, and why did I make this long, winding introduction concerning expense accounts? How does that lead up to you?
Yeah, great. Good question. I was just pondering a little bit over the way you phrased it actually myself. I work at Pleo, as you mentioned, and Pleo is a Danish startup, around 5 years old. And basically, what we are doing is that we want to kill expense reports. That is our mission in life right now. We have some other things down the line, but right now that's really the problem that we're trying to solve for our customers. So what we do is that we basically automate that and try to eliminate all the hassle connected to doing expense reports, everything from filling it out, but also, as you mentioned, the lending your company your personal money, which we just think is completely mad that we still do, and majority of companies out there expect their entry level employees to do as well.
That's exactly why the way we've titled this episode is Trust But Verify, because come to think of it, the very first expense account that I'm pretty sure 99% of us had was the money that our mother gave us to go to the shop. It was a much more trustworthy expense account when she simply gave you the money and asked for the change afterwards, not if you could supply the money yourself and then she would pay you back. So, short personal introduction about yourself. How do you land in play, or what is the driver for you, like on that murderous mission of expense accounts?
Yeah.
Sorry, those reports.
Yes, I actually joined Pleo 2 years ago, so I've been on the journey for the last 2 years. It feels like 2 weeks, but it's gone by really quick. Prior to Pleo, my journey, I'm actually from Sweden. I'm born in Iran, but raised in Sweden, and I've been spending my grown-up, my adult life between the UK, Sweden, and the US. So ever since I went to university in England, I joined a Norwegian startup called Meltwater when I was in my early teens, 20s after university, and I joined the startup sort of SaaS world then. Pretty fast growth, and had a really exciting journey there where I got to travel a lot and set up a lot of offices and build a lot of teams. And after about 10 years there, I came across Pleo and jumped over and have been here ever since. So right now I'm responsible for our sales organization, which is around 50, 60 people now, including our partnerships team. And we're in 6 markets, European wide. And we're just getting started, to be honest. So we're going through a pretty exciting growth journey right now, and have just come off a really strong quarter of Q1, where we feel like we have put COVID pretty far behind us, and are now back on hyper growth mode.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a lot about that in a
Hmm.
second, then.
Yeah.
But just sort of because usually we do this in this prism of the person, the company, the industry. So just one question before we proceed to how well Pleo did in the last quarter. A day in the life of a VP of sales at Pleo. Is it just reaching out to companies and educating them in the errors of their ways, or?
I wish I did more of that, to be honest with you. I do try to find time for that. But no, a day in the life of a VP of sales at Pleo right now, it consists of a lot of meetings, which is actually another thing we're trying to kill, both internally as a company, but also myself. But of course, a lot of these meetings are valuable. I spend the majority of my times doing two things. One is coaching my team as we're growing really fast and we're trying to grow from within. There's a lot of coaching and training and developing of people and managers to take on more responsibility, basically on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And then if I'm not doing that, I'm sitting in strategy meetings. The company is evolving and growing, taking on new challenges basically on a monthly basis with new product launches, etc. So that requires a lot of strategic planning in terms of our business model, pricing strategies, market launches. So I'm doing either one or the other.
Okay. So before, I don't want to get you off too easy with talking about the successful quarter. You
Mhm.
just mentioned the growing pains, the teething pains of a high growth startup. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because previously, with people from co-founder positions or VP positions like
Mm.
yourself, we've heard about the sort of subtle nuance of not just being in a high growth startup, but being in a high growth startup during everything that's happening to do with the virus, right? So, any insights on that? Whether there were some obstacles that you didn't anticipate, or some things that were made possible by COVID that helped with the growth?
Yeah, of course. So we, as most companies in Europe, were hit by it in March last year, and we're basically spread across Europe. So it's been really interesting, as I'm sure you've spoken to others, where things have happened in waves. Some of our markets were very slow, some were early in terms of reactions to lockdowns. Take Sweden as an example versus UK. Like Sweden never went into full lockdown, while countries like UK went really hard. So it's been really interesting from just a macro perspective, but from a Pleo specific when it comes to our what we sort of felt when it all happened. I would say that it was pretty dramatic for us. I basically we're an expense management solution, or that's what people use our tool for. And if you just think about it, when majority of Europe went into lockdown, that means that no one's expensing anymore. Everyone was working from home. So majority of our spend coming from travel, meals, team building, the typical things that a company spends company money on or employees spend company money on. That stopped overnight. So we definitely had a major crisis mode in the first couple of weeks and months after lockdowns were announced. So there was a lot of soul searching of what are we, what should we do, how do we cope with this, a lot of answering to boards and all sorts of stakeholders. But it's been incredible, to be honest. We talk about it a lot internally that we have been successful selling our tool despite all of that. And I think the reason was that we were very quick to adapt and sort of figure out ways to still help companies that were operating and in the way they were operating, because there were some expenses that started more after COVID. So just being really agile and really listening and understanding our customers made that were able to shift focus really quickly. So to basically change our ads and targets and messaging to not be about dinners and hotels and flights, but to be about subscriptions and ad spend and equipment and working from home costs and things like that. And it really did pay off. We did have a quarter in Q2 last year that we definitely, all the graphs go, they just tank. But then gradually from end of like June, July time, we sort of have a gradual, basically, back, sort of turning the curve again. And this quarter, like I mentioned, has been record breaking in every aspect of the company. So yeah, that's a little bit of an insight. around that.
That's exactly what I wanted to. I wanted to give you this trampoline for you to jump into the good
Yeah.
stuff, because first I wanted to hear about the soul searching, and
Mm,
as it seems, this soul searching allowed you to draw the conclusion we are hitmen for everything that's a bad practice in expensing.
yeah.
So how, if we jump on that trampoline onto the
Yeah.
flattering, onto the good stuff, how was the last quarter then?
No, but the last quarter, I think, has just been so. One thing we did when COVID hit last year, and we realized that we're going to have a period of downtime, both from all aspects. We expected the worst, and there was no point, no part of us that thought like we're going to give up. It was more like, okay, we're going to have downtime. What do we do? And in sales, and I think in other parts of the company, we decided that this is an opportunity for us to, by downtime, I mean we were going through a hyper growth mode. So I came into 2020 with a hiring forecast of 70 people in 1 year, just for sales alone. And that takes every resource you have. All your focus is on hiring, growing, starting offices. We were supposed to launch 4 new markets last year. So there were things that we killed, and that we didn't focus on. And that just meant that it freed up a lot of resources and time for us doing other things. And what we decided to do when we killed off some of those things was to say, all right, let's go down in the gym and like really build our base, our foundation. Let's make, go deeper in the countries we're in. Let's focus on our skills, our upskilling our teams, our projects, our processes, our workflows. Because when you're running at that kind of hyper growth mode, there's a lot of corners you cut because you're doing it at scale and you're focusing on other things. And we just decided to do it the reverse. So we're like, okay, if we're not doing that, let's do this really, really well. And I think Q1 has just been an absolute direct result of all of that work. It's just been really improving our workflows, our infrastructure, our in sales methodologies, hiring, training our teams and reps and managers. And now we're seeing the results of that. We're able to sell expense management to companies that are still in lockdown, full lockdown all over Europe, and doing it to a point where we're basically now able to increase our sales targets for our reps and prove that it's possible. So I'm really happy with that more than anything.
I promise I'm actually warning you. So far, a lot of things that you're saying are very quotable. So our team will definitely go to
Oh,
make posts with, the profile picture that you shared and the quotes that you just mentioned. So of
sounds
course
good.
we will confirm those with you, but beware, they're coming. So hypergrowth. You're driving first place in the race, I hope. And in your rearview mirror, who is the competitors and how do they differentiate, or how do you differentiate from them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the way we talk about our competitive landscape is that it's quite interesting because when you have a disrupting technology, you usually have the legacy players. And the legacy players in our space is not necessarily direct competitors. They're not doing what we do, but they have solved the same problem in other ways. So in our case, it's not one, but it's the banks, as an example. It's like company cards or credit bank cards that you would give to your employees. That's one aspect of the competitive landscape for us. Then you have, expense management tools. So they're just apps, the receipt capturing apps. And there's a huge variety of those. They don't handle the payments, they just handle the receipt capturing. So you have the bank cards that would handle the card transactional piece. You have the expense management tools. And then you have what we call, what all of us are, or our SaaS sort of the new financial fintechs of our similar kind of companies. We're still combined. All of us are just a drop in the ocean of basically an Excel world, because our direct competitor in all of this is Excel, and it's manual processes that companies have created by themselves for themselves with receipts being stapled onto paper and photocopied. And I don't know about you guys, but me personally and my old company, and I worked in a modern SaaS company like Scandinavian. And I don't know how many hours of my life I spent in those 10 years just photocopying, you know, receipts and trying to find which one it belonged to and filling out sheets. So that is majority of our competitor. But of course, these days we do have other companies similar to Pleo who are on this disruptive journey with us. So that's there are still some differences, and I would say how I would differentiate us to those direct competitors, it comes in actually in many ways as well. So it's both technology, infrastructure, it's from team and culture, but also priorities, sort of the missions that we're on and what we're trying to solve for. So it's a pretty broad topic. Where would I start? I think from a technology and product infrastructure side of things, we have focused on a number of things that I don't think everyone has done. So as a player in this space, anyone can become a card issuer or start sort of pushing cards. You can white label cards. There's many ways of offering a similar solution, especially in terms of how you describe it. So you can be a receipt capturing tool that suddenly offers cards, etc. What we have done is that we've invested majority of our resources and funding and everything into building the infrastructure, what we call our house, the Pleo house. And I think that really does set us apart. It comes down to what our relationship is with MasterCard, what our relationship is with our banks, and taking away all the middlemen. So we are our own issuer, we are our own, we have our own licenses. So there isn't any middlemen between us and the direct suppliers of our processes these days. And that really makes us feel very confident about growth and scale and the kind of security we provide to our customers. So those are things that are hard to see from the outside. When you look at 3 different companies next to each other, they all sound and look the same. But how things are done in a financial technology like this is really important. So that's one aspect.
Okay. I don't mean to interrupt. Is there another one, or?
Yeah, well, there's the other one that is quite interesting, I think, is how do I describe this? So it's coming back to your first topic that you started the call with, which is around trust. So we are actually, as a company, we're building our tool and product to be basically centered around trust. So for employers to trust their employees. And it's interesting because most companies that sell this type of product focus around control. And there are 2 different things. So you can solve this problem in a number of different ways. We're choosing to build our product in a way that it's about basically transparency. So employers will give cards to all of their employees, whether they're an intern or if they're in the C-suite. So that's how Pleo is built. So it's a card for everyone. However, this can be quite resisted by a lot of companies because they're like, I can't give access to company funding to just anyone, to an intern who just started or an entry-level sales rep. Like, we can't trust them to have a company card. And this is what we really challenge, because how some of our competitors tackle this is to say, oh, no, but don't worry. We have put in all aspects of control measures here so that you can control who spends and how they spend and what they spend. What we're saying is that we will make everything so transparent that you can see and they can see what you spend and how you spend and where you spend it. We're not blocking anyone, but by making it transparent, we believe that people behave better with company money, and they feel like because you're giving them the trust, they also take more responsibility and care for the company money in a different way. So there are these other sort of cultural and sort of values-driven differences that, again, is a little bit like the infrastructure piece. It's not super obvious when you just compare 2 companies next to each other, but it's a little bit how we're trying to solve the problem.
And
does that make sense?
it does. It absolutely does. And it actually leads me into my next question, which is something that you've gracefully transitioned us into, the cultural aspect. So you're in 6 markets, right?
Yes.
So that Pleo house, how does the Pleo house differ across each of those 6 different markets? I imagine that they have some common denominators across all of them, but I also imagine that there are some intricacies that are just loyal to this one specific region in which you are.
So when I say the Pleo House, I'm actually referring to sort of our infrastructure. So we basically how we built our relationships with the technology and finance sort of institutions. But
Okay.
I get what you mean though. So I will definitely answer that question. I just wanted to make sure we're not talking about
Sure,
different
sure, sure.
things.
My bad.
No, no, it's fine. So yeah, we're in 6 markets, and we're selling the same product in all markets. So we don't adjust our products to Spain to be different in Spain compared to Denmark or Sweden or UK and Germany. So it is the same product, but this challenge of trust and control varies quite differently in those markets because we have some of our European countries that are definitely more traditional, more sort of maybe also not as, I won't say technologically or financially, what's the word? They're not necessarily as early adopters in that as you see, for instance, the Nordic countries being. So there are definitely some cultural differences that makes us having to describe or have to work a little bit harder to get someone to buy into Pleo's values compared to other countries. So there's differences in that, and then there's also differences when it comes to, for instance, hiring and building our teams, where we also find that there are cultural differences in each of our countries. So on the first one, just take an obvious one. Take Spain as a market. Spain is a huge market, so much opportunity. It's one of the biggest markets for small businesses in Europe, and we right now are tailoring very much like SMBs and SMEs. So for us, Spain is a fantastic market. But then you take what we just talked about and try to adopt that to a Spanish market when it comes to sort of traditional ways of working, maybe the adoption of automation and integrations with accounting softwares and things like that are much further behind than some of our other European countries. So it takes that is a challenge, but also then the trust and control. So if you are traditional and conservative and when it comes to that, it's not super obvious that you're going to give cards to all your employees and suddenly trust them. The educational piece of that requires a lot more work from our side. So we have talked about, should we just position Pleo differently in Spain? Should we call it be much more control based? Should we talk about those things more? And then with most of the time, we've just said like, no, it's better that the right companies find us, the companies that are ready for doing that. We're not going to take every single company in Spain overnight. So we'll start with the ones who, are already in this mindset and are thinking like this and can buy into this, and then gradually win the rest of the market. When it comes to the second part that I mentioned, it's quite interesting. So this is more about sales, as which I'm responsible for. Hiring for salespeople is completely different in each of our European countries, and I find this quite fascinating. So you have UK and Sweden as an example, or even Spain, where a sales career is actually it's seen as an attractive career option for high performing graduates or entry level or even senior level. People are excited about it. They see it as a way into business and entrepreneurship and startup, etc. While then you have other countries like, for instance, Denmark and Germany, where a role in like a career in sales is very much looked down upon, and people are not interested, and you just get like no applicants, and you have to drag them into the roles to just even consider a role in sales, and it's so cultural because it's just not looked upon as an attractive career path. So there are these nuances across Europe.
Well, first of all, as a salesperson, ouch. Second of all,
I agree.
and even with the remotization of work, I mean, that must suck for you guys completely because I mean, right now with the remotization of work, of course, I could hire a developer, whoever I need, wherever in the world. But here, you need that person to be from the area. You need that person to have a sense, some
Mhm.
connection to their region, so they can understand the small and medium enterprise owners. You can't just outsource, for example, me, deploy me in Germany and try to get the results. So I
Mhm.
imagine that must be difficult. Actually, in the comments, we're hearing two hellos from Spain.
Mhm.
So potentially, just check out the comments. Maybe they are just
Yes,
Pleo customers waiting to join.
exactly. That's cool.
So we
Hello to
just
everyone in Spain.
We just spoke about trust. So, what's the formula for trust? Because you make it sound so easy, as if you just come into the company, wave the magic wand, and presto, we have trust. The two things that I have identified
Hmm.
of why trust sort of makes sense on a mathematical level, which is very often the level of people who want to be controlling.
Hmm.
And one thing is like the brutally simple mathematics of it all, that if you compare scenario one, in which Sarah has to do all the things, expense her own money, request that return, someone in the finance department has to process it, either approve it, deny it, then they have to send it, someone has to issue the invoice, so on and so forth, compared to it's automated and all of those steps are reduced just down to the single invoice element that I just mentioned. So that's like the brutally simple mathematics of it all. And then I'm sure that there is a whole other world of the benefits of a trust based work environment just outside of expenses, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, just on the sort of the Pleo product side, just to start there, I think it makes a massive difference to be, as we talked about, let's say you have an entry level, you just hired a graduate into any normal company, from tech to traditional. And the first thing they have to do sometimes is to buy their own computer or a train ticket for a training session or whatever it is. Like if you're a graduate, recent graduate, you just finished university, you have a student loan, your entry level salary is probably not very high. You're getting your first, accommodation in a big city like London or Berlin or whatever. Your costs are over your head. The fact that we as employers think it's okay to ask that rep to pay for, a train ticket of 200 euros or something to get to come to a place and do their work or whatever cost it is. Usually there's a lot of different types of costs, but basically they have to pay us to come in and work and then wait 2 3 weeks to get their money back. That whole aspect, and we accept it as employees. We accept it. I did it in my first jobs. I know for sure, and I'm sure many of us have. But we accept it as employees because we think that's how it's done, and the employer expects it because that's how it's always been, and no one has questioned this, right? So when it comes to the difference there, so imagine being now a new employee, you join a company, and the first thing you get on your day one with your computer and whatever, you also get a company card, and it says, here, use this to get your train ticket to this meeting, or use this to buy yourself the whatever it is, lunch at this meeting or whatever it might be. It just makes all the difference in how you feel about this company because from the get-go, they're giving you trust. From like the entry, hello, welcome, here's our trust. And I think people just trust is, for me, is a direct correlation to responsibility, right? And respect. And I think sort of how I actually talk about it when it comes to management, which sort of segues into the second point about sort of trust-based environment. I think trust is connected to loyalty, and those two things are quite interesting if you think about them, right? So in management, we always talk about trust and loyalty. Trust is something you earn, but loyalty is something that someone freely gives to you. They don't have to give it to you. You can have a trust and respect and responsibility without loyalty. But I think when you trust someone, you can gain their loyalty. And I think when you have someone's loyalty, you have that in sort of inbuilt responsibility and care for the environment that you're in. And I think Pleo does this incredibly well. One thing we talk about when I do interviews for our candidates, we do a values interview, which is sort of the last session. And in that session, we talk about all of our company values, and they're sort of focused around empowerment and trust and transparency. So, not dissimilar to how what a product does for other companies. So it's almost like we are building the core values of our product within our own company, and then we're trying to spread that through our product to other companies. Of course, for the companies who want it, we can't force it down anyone's throat. So, I know when I joined 2 years ago, I was amazed because it's one thing talking about empowerment and trust, and then there's another thing really truly experiencing it. And I just remember I was, 1 month into the job, and I had some ideas around our business model, and I was like, but this doesn't really make sense to our CEO. Like, can you really do this? And I'm still amazed that he's like, well, let's change it. This was a pretty significant change. I was just questioning. I wasn't suggesting we should change it, but I just, from small to big, how things like empowerment can really be given, where someone can sit there and feel like, oh my God, like I have the right or ability to change something fundamental here because I am so trusted with this. So it's a good feeling. So why not do more of that?
And you mentioned those that want to, and those that don't want to, they'll have to learn the bad way, and they'll just come crawling back, I'm sure, when everybody else will have caught up to the right way to handle expenses. And also when you mentioned the relationship between respect and trust, uh, flip that, and
Hmm.
with the lack of trust, you have disrespect, right? In some
Exactly.
sense, when you are in a very multi-level marketing fashion, actually, come to think about it, expect the employee to have a buy-in to do the work that they're supposed to do for you. It's pretty much like the companies that expect you to buy the shampoos, then you can start selling them, and then they will only pay you a success fee. So I think we really have to do away with this, because it's a control tool basically at this point, right? Because if I, as an employer, have the confirmation that with this card issued by Pleo, or whichever company we take into this example, the employee cannot spend more than the allowance for the ticket and maybe $15 for food on the day, then if I am not scared that somehow that money can spiral out of control and they're going to expense a Ferrari, then there is really no other reason than just being scared of losing control over your employees. So it all
Yeah,
makes
and
sense the further we dive into it.
exactly. I mean, the thing is that everything in Pleo, like when I talk about transparency, is that everything is visible in real time. So because it's a smart card, so as soon as you buy something, it's on your, on your dashboard for you and your manager and the finance. Everyone can see it. So this is what we mean. So why control and limit when you know that if I'm your employer, if you spend something and I can see it, then you're not going to go and spend something you're not supposed to. You're only going to buy what you're supposed to be buying because I can see that. So there's no hiding of things. So that's what we mean that why put in controls when you can make it transparent and therefore people will have a better sort of behavior around it. I think the traditional way of expensing is where there's a lot of room for dodgy or rogue expenses when no one's going to sit and check if that was a Saturday night with your friends that these drinks were ordered, or if that was Thursday night with your team, because when you pile it up in 3 months worth of receipts and go, here you go, here are my expenses, they generally just get signed off, right? So companies actually think they're saving money in that way, but there's so much that shouldn't have been approved happening in the background.
Yeah, I almost said guilty, but just in case the Guru finance or compliance department is watching, not guilty. So not guilty. But just like you said, I mean, right now I could tell you, oh, Sarah, I misplaced the receipt, but here's the payment confirmation from that restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
It's 250 euros. Sorry, no line items, just the amount. Just like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, it's counterproductive and counterintuitive in terms of time, money, and the risk of someone, let's say, making the expense account more elastic than it should be.
Exactly.
So the next logical step, when
Mm-hmm.
we figure out the trust, everybody's loving each other in the organization to the point where money is not an issue. Um, the next step that I imagine would be is like the data intelligence of it all. Because when you help out employee number 1 to 50, 100, 200 in a company, what should be visible for me as the organization owner is, okay, so actually the expenses either of specific departments or people by seniority or just the entire company, it looks like we have some trends, and they're spending 34% on food, 56 on travel, and the other ones are scattered into smaller categories. So then as an employer, I can, for example, say, okay, so if it's travel and if it's food and if they usually order via Uber Eats, maybe I can reach out to the train slash airplane company and get a better deal for my company, since there's so many expenses that are happening anyway, decrease my costs because I have the volume of sales, and do the same with Uber Eats. Just get some special deal for my employees because they make in a volume that is going to be interesting for Uber Eats. Like, is that one of the avenues to pursue?
I mean, should I confirm? No, but
Uh,
of course it is. I think that's it's an obvious one, right? So we're capturing a lot of data with our spend, and we're already, of course, it's anonymous data, so we don't really care about right now, like the company or where, but we can draw some analysis and trends right now in terms of, before and after COVID, how has spend behavior changed, or within a company, all our customers receive full analytics of their spend. So I think this is definitely the way forward in terms of how can companies then use this information in a better way to cut costs or be smarter with their spend or gather understanding of how they spend the company is spending money. So this is actually, if it was narrowed down to expenses, I don't think companies would get a good view of this. And in order for us to do this better, this has been always the foundation of like where Pleo is going, in which direction we're going. But in order to do this, and it's sort of to align it with our company goals, as you might have picked up on in the beginning, I was a little bit vague around what we are in terms of expense management, because that's not really what we are or want to be. So expenses is the first product that we're sort of really going deep on. But already this month, we're launching Pleo Bills, and we're going into subscriptions. So Pleo as a company is a business spend solution. So expenses is one form of spend. Invoices and bills is a second form of spend companies have. A third is subscriptions and subscription management. These are also spends, but they can happen in different ways and in different places and through different channels. So what we are doing now is that we're definitely broadening the spend categories. And when we can capture majority, if not all, of a company's spend, then they can really utilize that data, our customers, in the best possible way to say, how are we spending across market, across teams, across functions, as an example. Where can we, work smarter? Take subscriptions as an example. How many legacy subscriptions someone has left and you're still paying their subscriptions as a company, or you paying duplicate subscriptions, different teams are paying to the same vendor for the same solution. There's so much to do within that space. There's a lot of tools for subscription management, but the power comes in having these together, so you can look at your expenses versus subscriptions versus invoices, and add them into a collective pot of data and analysis versus isolating them into each of them by themselves. So that's happening, and that's really where Pleo is heading in. So we're launching Builds in the UK now as our first market. And this is super exciting because Bills is also massively invoice payments. It's such a legacy. People majority is happening still through your Barclays Bank or HSBC, etc., with massive fees and costs associated with every time you pay an invoice. So this is something that we're really excited to launch now as a complement to our expense handling.
and is this a fresh announcement? Like, has this been announced anywhere before, or is this?
I actually don't know if I'm gonna get someone on my back after this. Maybe we can cut this out, but no, I'm pretty sure it's pretty new. Yeah, we haven't officially launched it yet, but it's being communicated in the next few days, if not today.
I
So
mean,
yeah.
just some time ago, we had Kareem, so the Middle Eastern delivery of food and people app, and we also had some announcements there. So I'm just asking because I'm curious. Of course, the publicity is crazy if we come up with an announcement that's fresh here,
Yeah.
just off the presses. So if you make sure
It's
that we're
it's
not getting
pretty
you in
it's pretty
trouble,
fresh. Yeah, I hope I'm not getting into trouble. I should have double checked that. No, I think it's fine. It's fine.
okay. So we've got Pleo Bills, and the last idea that I have would be Pleo Crystal Ball. So machine
Hmm.
learning. After a year or a couple of feeding Pleo's system the data, perhaps some legacy data as well, if that's permitted. I imagine that as a company owner, CFO, anybody who's actually doing anything with budgeting, with planning, with spend, I would love for Pleo to tell me in advance that, hey, judging by last year, you're probably going to get expenses to the tune of this annually, which will be split into Q1 is not going to be heavy on your budgets. Q2 is going to be crazy. Q3 is going to be low because it's summer, and then Q4 is going to be just fine. Is that also? I mean, I'm sure it is with the
I mean,
budgeting beast that
you
you're
can do that
creating.
right now. So I think you can already do that because you have full analytics of Pleo, your spend through
Okay.
Pleo right now. So companies, our customers who have Pleo for everyone and is using it across the whole company can do that today. Especially if you've now had it for a few years, you can go back, right? So you can see on a monthly, weekly, you can look into how much FX do we spend? You know, how much are we spending on international travels? Extra, like that you can, that information is already there. I think where it's going to get even more interesting is if we can, like you said before, now leverage this to cut people's costs. To say last year spent this much on taxi, like you said. What if we gave you, because we work with something called Pleo Perks, like the relationships we can create with third party vendors and companies, and say by being a Pleo customer you get 10% off. So why don't you use, you know, as you said earlier, for example, Uber instead of Bolt or instead of normal taxis, and then you cut your total travel cost from this to this. So I think that's definitely where, the, again, something we've already launched and are working on, and our customers are already benefiting from. So it's not too far in the future, but I think there's much more we can do there.
Okay. There are actually some questions connected to what you said, but
Hmm.
I want to wipe out my questions so we can jump into the audience's ones.
Yeah.
And mine are loose, but we ask them to every guest speaker.
Hmm.
So brace yourself. Your decision making framework. It doesn't have to be specific. It can be broad. That's completely up to you. But like a rule of thumb that you follow as an executive when it comes to making day-to-day decisions at Pleo.
Yeah. Mm,
Like, does it spark trust, for example? Is that the overarching question of whatever you do?
I think in terms of decision making, of course, trust. I think trust must be inbuilt already within the relationship that we have. So I don't think that's a factor necessarily for me personally. I think for me personally, it's a little bit more of a like a common sense approach. I think decision making can be really painful sometimes if you're in sales like me, and you know how difficult some companies can make it into making just a decision. Do you want to buy, yes or no? to internally the same way. I think we try to make it as simple as possible, and to be as quick as possible so that we don't drag it out. And there's a balance between this consensus aspect of making decisions. Is everyone agreed? Is everyone happy with this? Should we do this? It's very Scandinavian. It's very, very Swedish to be consensus based. I think I have a little bit of that in me. It's important to me to make sure that everyone is bought in, but then there's a balance between that and getting something done, and not dragging it out, because when you're working at the pace that we are, usually we need to get things done quickly. So I think for me, how I make my decisions is probably a combination of the two, making sure that I have a team behind me, and that, so that's probably the trust-based aspect. So making sure that this is something that people get behind and can rally around. And while making sure we don't drag it out, so that we can be efficient.
Solid
Does that
answer.
answer it?
Solid
Okay,
answer.
good,
Absolutely.
good.
Uh, and the last one from me, I hand over you remotely a magic wand, and you get to say Abracadabra. All 12-year-olds in the world will now be taught what? We've heard computer science, system thinking, design thinking. Of course, here I'm sensing we're going somewhere closer to financial prudence and just being smart with money, or maybe there's something else. Surprise me.
I know. I think that would have been maybe the obvious one. I wasn't going to say that. I don't know. I think this is much more personal than Pleo related. But I feel like looking at the world we live in today, and what I wish I could change if it was me, and I had that magic wand, I think for me it would be about teaching our youth about, I don't even know what the word would be here, but learning how to manage and understand and work with the internet as a source. Because I think when we're looking all of the, take Facebook, take the elections we've had lately about fake news, etc., being able to differentiate and learn the difference between, just viral content, user generated, to trusted sources, and learning about that and really understanding and being able to separate what's real and what's fiction. I think this is something that is really damaging us today because people are so uneducated. And it's not just the children of the world, but it's, the children that grow up to be adults. To really teach people more about sourcing and learning, understanding, and not buying into any meme they see on their feeds when they scroll by. I just think it's having such a massive impact on our world today. So if there's one thing, I would probably zoom into that area.
Okay, that's a very nice and refreshing answer because, of course, it's not that the previous answers from our guest speakers were boring, but they were. This one was not predictable. That's what I'm saying. So definitely,
I mean, I
thanks for
could have said
sharing.
financial responsibility as well, because I have a lot on that topic as well, but I'm sure that's a little bit too predictable.
There's actually a subject at school. It's called theory of knowledge, which it's of course it's not taught universally across all schools, but some of them do, and that's exactly what you said, which is what do I know and how do I know what I know? What are my sources? Is this just like helping me fight the cognitive dissonance and reinforcing that I feel right, or is this something that I should question? So definitely, I mean, if we're even getting answers in the comments saying agree 100%. So
That's great.
definitely
Good to hear.
two 10 out of 10 answers for my questions. That's all from me. Let's jump into the comment section. Uh,
Thank you.
Dominica asks, is there any quote unquote legit reasons for employers behaving the way it's been described? Any areas and or industries where such spending oversight is simply necessary?
I'm trying to understand the full question. I think maybe it's taken out of something that we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, probably it refers to the fact that we have employers acting in the legacy way.
Oh,
And the
okay.
question here, I believe, is there any industry or area in which it's justified? Like, I don't know,
Hmm.
medical spending or anything to do with legal expenses, sort of things that, due to regulation frameworks that are outside of the company's hands, simply have to happen in that way. Like, do they have any excuse? Basically, that's the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah. No, but I'm sure there are, I think the only time personally I can justify it is if you have really senior employees with really, it's a little bit connected to their pay grade and things. What I think is quite interesting is that we've done the opposite, right? The most junior are the ones that we don't trust and who have to pay out of pocket. And the people who are making, the good amount of money and the high salaries, who can afford to pay out of pocket, they're the ones who don't need to because that's who we give a card to. So it's a little bit on the flip side. So I think if there would ever be a reason, it would be sort of your senior consultants, maybe someone who's not part of your company. So they would bill you afterwards. So of course, if you're a consultant, it would be difficult to give you access to company money because you're not an employee of the company. So I think in situations where you're dealing with consultancies, external, or even really senior employees who need to spend on a different type of basis, which is outside of the norm potentially. But even then, I think there are ways to manage this in a better way.
All of those champagne bottles waiting to be popped and expensed while the restaurants open up. Um,
Exactly.
the last question that I see is from Zofia, and she asks, "Do you think it is possible for employers to switch to employees having cards, and on top of that, connecting that to the company's perk system?" And I know you did mention Pleo perks,
Hmm.
but I imagine here it would be the idea that, okay, so I am the employee, the more entry level than not in this example, and I have some costs, like I go to a business meeting twice a month, but also the company offers me perks, like it gives me money to spend in some benefit system, it gives me healthcare. Do you see a world in which those two work as one? And I, for
Yeah.
example, if I do something right at work, I get recognized, I get rewarded. All of a sudden, plus 100 company points, which translates to $100, let's say, for my spending within the partners that the company has partnered up with.
Yeah. It's really interesting. This is an area where we're really sort of interested in and curious about. We right now there's no connection between those two things with Pleo specifically. There is things like, as an example, Pleo ourselves as an employer right now we have, you can get bike to work schemes or different types of benefits and in each country. And of course, for us, that means that we just put that on our Pleo card, or we can put this our LinkedIn subscription on our Pleo card, or whatever different types of costs and benefits that we have. But I think what we've seen is that there's a lot of new companies coming around which are basically doing cards specifically for benefits. Like there's like these benefit companies that offer cards so that you can use it for your healthcare instead, or your gym membership, or for these type of things. So right now there's nothing preventing a Pleo customer to use a Pleo card for that, but it's not necessarily a point-based system where you get rewards through what you call perks on top of your Pleo card. So right now we don't offer that specifically, but I definitely think these are the things that we're playing around with a lot and talking a lot about is how we can we make these things more interesting for our employees and employers.
That sounds like it's everything when it comes to the interrogation that's been lasting for 50 minutes now. So thank you so much for being such a graceful guest speaker. I don't have any more questions unless you have any wrapping up remarks. I just wanted to announce one thing.
No,
Okay. So
thank you so much.
as you might have heard, 13th of April, you just can't miss it. You got what, 7 days left? We're going to be doing Disruption Forum FinTech. So, whilst these 50-minute bites of disruption talks are like the entree, you can imagine Disruption Forum FinTech is the main deal and dessert. So, on the 13th of April, we're going to be sharing the link in the comment section for you to sign up. You're going to be hearing from guest speakers like Pleo themselves joining us over there for one of the panels. And I will be your host. So we're really looking forward. I see that Kasia already posted the link. So you have no excuse. It's free knowledge from industry leaders. Be there or be square. And that's the end of the shameless plug when it comes to Disruption Forum FinTech. So, Sara, thank you so much for today. It was a blast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me and have a great week.
Same to you. See you soon.
See you. Bye bye.